Okay, well, welcome everyone to this very exciting Credits Due panel from a sunny London in the middle of Ivors Week, which is the week-long celebration of songwriting here in the UK. So I'm hoping that we have a UK and an international audience, and we have a fantastic panel which you'll be introduced to in a minute, and we have a wonderful, small but perfectly formed audience with us as well, who hopefully will pose some questions of the panel. So my name is Graham Davis. I'm CEO of the Ivors Academy. It's a huge joy to introduce this event. It's the first of the Credits Due sort of live stream recorded events. And Credits Due is an initiative that we launched together with the Music Rights Awareness Foundation from the Ivors in September last year. And that was in recognition of a problem that the industry is very well aware of, and you will hear a lot about tonight, which is the data problem. So with Credits Due, we have an initiative which is posing the question to everybody. Everybody can have a role in this. Everyone can help solve this problem that we have, which is we think we need to ensure complete and accurate song metadata is attached to all recordings at the point of creation. We think if we could move to that, if we could resolve that issue, it would really deliver massive benefits for songwriters, and we have some songwriters here today, and their publishers, through to the consumers and the streaming services who want this data as well, and everybody in between that's dealing with the processing and management of all of this data, which, as I say, is a challenge. So big thanks to DEMA, and we have Garrett Levin here today. Thanks for being with us, Garrett, and thank you for DEMA's support as sponsors of Credits Due. And we also thank Michelle Lewis from Sona, who are the equivalent of the Ivors Academy in the US, for also being here. So I'm now going to stop talking and introduce you to the host of the panel, who is an absolutely fantastic songwriter. It's Fiona Bevan, who's an Ivors Academy director, also a Peerless for Music director, amongst many other hats. And we were talking about hats. There's going to be many hats that are going to be talked about this evening. So thanks so much for doing this, Fiona, and over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Graham, and hi everybody. Yeah, it's lovely to meet you all. I got involved with Credits Due because as a songwriter for quite a few years, I'd started to see the issues about how songwriters weren't really getting paid properly and how it was very difficult to get credited for your work. No one knew who had written the songs. And so these two things, I was starting to work in that field with the Ivors and as part of PRS. And I think Bjorn asked me and Graham asked me to be part of Credits Due. And of course, you don't say no to Bjorn from ABBA, and you don't say no to Graham either. So it's really been an amazing journey to be part of this and to invite all of you to be here for this discussion today. Would you all like to introduce yourselves? Do you want to start, Tinashe?
Hi, I'm Tinashe. I'm a songwriter and a producer and an artist.
I'm Annabella Coldrick. I run the Music Managers Forum in the UK. We have about 1,200 manager members who in turn represent about 5,000 music makers, from artists, performing artists, songwriters and producers.
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm from PRS for Music. We're the UK Collection Society for composers, songwriters and music publishers.
Hi, Scott Farrant from Kobalt Music. I run global operations and industry affairs for Kobalt.
Hi, I'm Steph Marziano and I'm a songwriter and a producer.
Great, thanks everybody. So first of all, we're going to dive into who is a songwriter. How do you get identified as a songwriter? There are so many different ways in which you can be a songwriter in the studio, and that causes issues down the line in terms of how do you identify that songwriter in terms of like the data on the back end, and therefore how do you get paid and get credited? Okay, so first of all, a bit of like fun, exciting songwriting chat, because it's our favorite thing being in the studio writing. So have there been songs, so Tinashe and Steph, have there been songs that you've written where you maybe didn't know the names of you didn't know the surname of someone you ended up writing the song with, or a song where you didn't get credited? Have there been songs that you've been part of which have come out into the world and there have been huge errors in the sort of back-end data that have affected you, or just weird things that have happened along the way?
Yeah. Okay. So I recently signed a publishing deal, and I thought I had everything organized and labeled, and I thought I had my spreadsheet okay. And they've recently sent me the like official spreadsheet of like all of the codes and all of like exact names of everyone to put in, and I lazily would be like, oh, I wrote this with Fiona and blah, blah, and not really putting their official names. I didn't have any codes. I wrote, oh, we wrote this song in January 2022. It's this. I don't have any of the like WAVs or anything, and was really in for a shock when I realized how much data I was missing, and like having to go back and email everyone and ask for their CAE numbers. And it was like, I was kicking myself because I was like, oh, I should have just gotten this on the day, or, you know, whatever. So yeah, there's been loads of times recently where I'm like, oh, I really didn't organize this properly. And there's also, so my name's Steph, but my full name's Stephanie. So a lot of times on credits, it's either Steph with 2 Fs or Stephanie, and like, you know, getting those royalties to come in is really tricky because it's technically under a different name. So yeah, I feel like I've had all of them recently, but yeah, that's my recent experiences.
That's really interesting. It's nice to know that I'm not alone in the world of poor organization. I suppose I had a scenario very recently, and I've been working in music as well, working is a bit of a stretch, but I've been trying my best to be as vigilant when it comes to sort of keeping data of everyone who I work with. And very recently, a scenario that I thought would have been, you know, something that would happen in the past. I wrote a song with 3 people in a room, and then as the song came out some months later, there was some new characters on the credits, and the people were actually involved, and I hadn't been privy to the conversation. But it's scenarios like that in which you perhaps want to sort of be, as an artist or as a writer, sort of aware of who is in the room, what their roles are, and also checking for your own management and making sure that they're doing their jobs as well as they can to make sure things are logged well. Yeah. But I think these things just continue to happen because it's a bit of a murky sort of world that we work in. I think when we write music, you can sometimes escape into a world of creativity, and sometimes that opens up the floor to fault to a degree.
Let's talk about that actually for a moment, because it's really interesting, because the way that songs get written in the studio, there are so many different things that can happen. So yeah, speaking of hats, like we all wear quite a lot of different hats, don't we? And I mean, today we're sort of trying to focus on like what it's like to be a songwriter, but we're all also producers, right?
Correct, yeah.
And you and I are also artists. Mm-hmm. Steph, have you ever been an artist?
No, luckily.
Clever.
So it's like you sometimes walk into the room thinking, right, I'm going to be the producer today, but then and you end up writing as well, because you're not just pressing the record button or doing a string arrangement onto a written song. So it's complicated, right?
It is very, very complicated in the room, especially if you wear very many hats. But I think there's a bit of an honesty that is sometimes lacking between people, but I think it's down to you as a creator to always be aware that when you're creating something, it's special enough for you to want to know who is involved and, you know, take care of the work, because it is a work, it's a labor of love. And, you know, as a writer in the room, sometimes you turn into a producer, or as a producer sometimes you turn into something else, but it's important to just keep the thread as best possible, really.
Definitely. It's kind of being open to everything as well. I started off as an engineer, and I sometimes find now I'm probably a better engineer than when I was a full-time engineer, because being a writer producer, I kind of have to do everything anyway, but I just don't get credited as an engineer now. That's the only difference, I guess. But yeah, it's all different. I mean, Fiona, I'm probably sure you think the same, but my favorite part of the job is that every day is completely different. Yeah. Every day in the studio, you can never prepare for it. So I used to go in with a bunch of ideas just in the background or anything. Now I just go in, well, whatever happens, happens, because a writing day is different with every single artist.
Yeah. And I mean, it's such a strange, it is different every single day. And that means every single song ends up with a different type of list of contributors, you know, and this has made me think of a situation. I was on like a writing camp once where every single room had a bunch of, you know, songwriters and producers all writing for a huge like global artist, and the global artist, I don't want to say who it was, she was great. She kept like popping into every single room and like kind of listening and maybe giving feedback or saying a lyric and things like that. And so then everyone started having these thought processes of like, oh, has she now written on the song because she said the word like party or something and we've used that now or whatever. So there are such strange situations that happen in the studio, and it is really uncharted territory every day, and it's like the Wild West, isn't it?
Totally, and it never changes. Really.
Yeah,
it doesn't, and not in a negative way. I think that's both the positive and sometimes a negative. But the scenario you're speaking about there, small percentages being sort of nicked here and there, or sometimes you being forgotten in a scenario. I was speaking to a few of the panel upstairs in the green room about the processes that me as a songwriter and an artist, clearly with this giant hat, that sometimes I feel a bit overwhelmed with the sheer number of terminology and codes and such that you guys may be, perhaps versed in. That by the time I finished a 9-hour day writing a song, I just hope that my manager registers it well. But I think it's, chats like this are kind of important for us to sort of really get our heads into what these terms actually mean and why they're there, and how these works can actually, knowing what your work is doing can be beneficial to you to a degree.
I mean, one of the big reasons that I started on this journey was a huge song, kind of like one of the biggest songs I've ever written. When it came out, it was actually just before, Spotify started doing the songwriter credits where you can actually see who wrote it. And actually, when it came out, it didn't say anything there because that thing didn't exist yet. And on Wikipedia, it said that someone else had written it. And I had a publisher, not my publisher, but I had a publisher ringing me up saying, you've been going around lying, saying you've written this massive hit. And I was like, I wasn't lying. I can show you my PRS statements in like a year, if you like, to prove that it was me when a little bit of money starts flowing in or whatever. So it's like, it was so weird. I had no way to prove to anyone in the world that I'd written that song, except the one person I wrote it with knew that we wrote it together. And luckily that writer kind of stuck up for me and made sure that the credits were right. But I didn't have anyone on my team. I was completely, at that point, I was unpublished. I was a PRS member already because I'd been gigging. So, I was kind of in the, in that stage. And, but yeah, I didn't have management either. And so like I was completely on my own. And and that was one of the biggest songs I've ever written. And that can happen.
Very easily,
yeah. So I think there's a lot of need. So I suppose it's very interesting to look at how songs get written and how strange those scenarios can be. You can be literally writing a song on your own, in which case I suppose it's all on you to get it reported and make sure it comes through right. But you can write a song with many people in the room, people popping in. Have you ever had a song where like someone jumped on after you thought it was finished and they took some of the songwriting percentage?
Yes, it's the yearly occurrence.
Yeah.
And I think that the way things are now, even the slight change in having metadata available for you to click on Spotify / whatever you like, maybe shines a light on those scenarios. And it's maybe one of the biggest artists that I've ever written for. Credits continue to change on this one particular work.
Is it already out, or it's in the process of?
It's out. it's definitely there. No, don't worry, I'm not going to go into it and start to have a bit of a counselling
people are
session.
trying to jump on.
Yeah. I think.
Did they actually contribute something, or is it people trying to get a piece of the pie?
I think it's, first of all, the work travelled to a different country, and there may have been many people in the room past that point, but then they seemed the information changes from time to time. For the past few years, it has done anyway. Yeah. But I think that it feels like it's more important now for us to have more of an understanding, but maybe repeating myself a little bit here, of how that metadata is collected and what certain codes mean and what sort of rights you have as a songwriter to challenge credits and so forth if they're totally fictitious.
Yeah, because you can feel quite powerless, can't you, without the information? Yeah,
it just leans back again to the point that I was mentioning earlier, and that sometimes the songwriter or the creator or the creative in the room is I don't want to say forgotten, but you just feel like you just naturally have less power once that work leaves your studio. It leaves this, it goes to, I always love this scenario when I send the track to managers or labels and so forth, and I send it out. I can almost, after a few years being in the business, watch my importance start to sort of wither a little bit, and it's not, I don't think it's done on purpose. I think it's just, it's the nature of the beast of working for somebody who is a priority, which is my favorite word, and they want to make this person be as successful as possible. But sometimes I think I've seen in scenarios, for example, with you, you're quite forthright in your sort of, demand for credit and respect. And I think musicians, creators should all be quite sort of happy to do so, because you just have to keep fighting for that so that scenarios like that don't necessarily occur, if you see what I mean. But that comes with the knowledge. Yeah. Honestly, sitting here today, I was upstairs and we were talking, and it impresses me that there is so much more to this side of a work that I didn't know about. But, again, conversations like this are really important. Have you had a scenario like that?
Yeah, I've had a few as well. Similarly, it's tough because, the wearing different hats thing of, as the songwriter, I obviously want to be credited and I want my fair share. But as the producer, I want to forge a relationship with the artist and the management. So you don't want to fight back too much. It's a really tough balance of, say I write a song and there's 3 of us in the room and we all split it 33% each. And then they go in with another producer, and then that producer decides to write a different verse with that artist. Then what happens to the credits? Because the artist perspectives are like, well, I don't want to lose my share. But at the same time, for the people, the songwriters, we had done our work, but it was their decision to change. It's really murky and it's really challenging. And I've to be honest, a lot of the times I've just been like, I'll be the good person because I want to continue this relationship. But sometimes it is unfair, and I think that's kind of where you go, and that's when you let the management and your publishers decide. And I like to save face at that point and say, oh, just let you guys handle it. I'll say yes to whatever. But it's a really tricky thing because you want everyone to feel involved and important, including yourself, and you also want to do what's fair. And I think sometimes you just have to go back and forth with that.
Yeah, definitely. Super confusing. And I'd also like to just ask you both, after telling that story, one of those first co-writes that I ever did before I had any representation or help from anyone, before you were signed. So Steph, you were in America. So you've actually moved country, and I'm really interested to hear how that has affected, were you a member of an American collecting society and then you came to England and changed, or has it made things more complicated? Or
yeah, it's slightly complicated. I moved over to England when I was 18, so before I was in with the Rights Society, I went to PRS first, but then interestingly, my publishers are in America, so then I'm sort of having to now do it on the opposite end and obviously find the American Rights Society and then bring PRS. So I've kind of done it backwards in a way, but it's one of those things I never would have thought about. Truthfully, I would have been like, oh, cool. I didn't even just thought, oh, well, the publishers sort that. And then it was only recently I'm like, oh, God, actually, moving countries has made this slightly complicated. But touch wood, it's all okay.
Yeah. And then also just that thing of, I think a lot of songwriters, when they first start writing, they wouldn't necessarily call themselves a songwriter because they're at the very beginning of that process and they're experimenting, and they probably don't have the confidence, like you were just saying, to go, I'm a songwriter. And it's, now, of course, because of, TikTok and things like that, you could actually be at that stage and have a huge hit and not have anyone helping you collect that money in. No PRO, which is a performing rights organization, to collect the money. No management, no publisher. So yeah, this is why we're doing this, because the need for this is growing and growing. So I suppose maybe we should dig into some of the data stuff. We'll make it fun, I promise. So as Graham said, with Credits Due, we want everybody to learn and help us all attach the correct metadata at the point of creation to the song, because it's just not there at the moment. So a song goes out into the world, no one knows who wrote it, or there'll be a mistake, you know, and it takes a lot of time and money to correct the mistakes. Well, we can talk about all this stuff. I suppose, does someone want to kick off with either, maybe we can talk about an IPI, because I think that's really fascinating. So do you want to do that, Tim? Like, we'll say, like, what is an IPI?
Sure.
Okay.
So let's put it in context. PRS, we're the UK Collection Society for Composers and Publishers. We've got about 160,000 members. We need data to be able to be absolutely clear. We know exactly which member we're talking about at any given time. To put that in a wider context, we represent millions of songs, some of them direct with us, some of them from other societies. We get reported about 23 trillion performances a year. So this is just to paint a picture of why everything that we're trying to identify, everything that we're trying to connect, has to be done using data. It has to be done using clear identifiers. And that starts with the IPI, the Interested Party Identifier. It's an international standard for identifying songwriters, composers, and their publishers. So if you're a UK songwriter, by far the most common way that you would get yourself an IPI number is by joining a PRO. In this case, we're in the UK, PRS for Music, and that, as part of that joining process, you get a membership number, sometimes called a CAE number. That's what we used to call it. Acronyms die hard in the music industry, but it is now called it is the IPI number, and so that's a 8 or 9 digit number which uniquely identifies you by your name, that you can use whenever you need to submit data that identifies you as the composer, the songwriter, or the publisher who is interested in any kind of musical work.
And would a producer also have an IPI, or only if they call themselves a songwriter as well?
So the IPI number is there for anyone who has an interest in the composition. So if the producer is wearing that songwriting hat, and then they would require an IPI number, and hopefully they would be a member of a society. If you end up writing a song with an individual who doesn't have an IPI number, you can get a non-member assigned an IPI number, but currently that has to be done by the member, who needs to contact PRS if you're composing with a non-member, and we can, if you contact the membership team at PRS, we can assign them an IPI number, which then lets you register a complete picture of that work.
Yeah. Okay, so you turn up in the studio for the day with a new kid who's just fresh out of the starting gates, and they haven't got an IPI number, and does that mean they can get one in that moment, or they've got to go through that whole process? It's quite a long process.
It's not instant, and there's two routes that they could get that IPI number. Hopefully you would take them to one side and explain to them the many benefits of joining PRS for Music, and they would sign up straight away. And that's a process where the turnaround time from coming to us and registering to getting your IPI number out would take currently about 24 to 48 hours, depending on the process. The other way round would be that if they didn't want to join, but you wanted to make sure their interest was on the work, because we want a complete picture, whether they're a member or not, you would need to contact the team at PRS, and we would try and arrange that as quickly as we can for you.
Yeah. I can see you trying to jump in, Scott.
PRS, I have to say, are one of the best PROs in the world. They're one of the most open, one of the most transparent, one of the most easy to work with. I run global operations. That's not the case around the world. There are other organisations, and the IPA is actually under the control of CSAC, which is the Confederation Internationale of Societies Auditeurs and Compositeurs. They have quite a different view about access to IPI. So as a publisher, you don't have direct access to IPI. Only collective management organisations do. And so we, as publishers, get a quarterly CD-ROM of a so-called pocket edition, is how we get our IPI information.
Wow.
So did you say CD-ROM?
I said CD-ROM. If anyone doesn't know what a CD-ROM is, I can explain, I'm old. No, seriously, a CD-ROM. So there is a huge, it's one of the big blockers.
Wow.
When we get onto work identifiers, it's also worth pointing out that there's a hard dependency between having an IPI number and being able to get an ISWC. So you need to identify all of the songwriters with IPI numbers before you can get an ISWC. And that's the key identifier for works. So it's critical that becomes more accessible. It needs to be accessible, and it needs to be freely open and available, and it needs to be done in a scalable manner.
And is there a way that we could make that happen?
There is a way, as I said, though, it's under the auspices and the control of an organisation called CSAC.
Yeah.
PRS are one of the many, many members of CSAC, but that is the organisation. Publishers have been lobbying towards CSAC to have access to IPI for as long as I've been in the industry, and that's like 30 years or so.
Why is it so secret, do you think?
I don't represent CSAC.
Yeah, right.
Good answer.
Yeah. So, and, you know, how would... So I think, I mean, it's so that's the first stumbling block, really. If you haven't got one of these IPI numbers, or if you don't know how to get it, or your publisher doesn't even know automatically what your IPI number is, and only you can get it from PRS or from your PRO, right? So it's this very secret, it's oddly secret. Okay. That's the first huge stumbling block. Yeah.
What we should have, of course, is some form of app where you can type in some sort of other identifier, a social security number, or depending on what country you're in,
Totally.
the UK or whatever,
Yeah.
national insurance number or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you would immediately see your IPI number.
Yeah.
So you could use it in the studio and you could log it at the right time
Yeah.
and get it into the data at the right time.
Yeah.
Of course, if you're a PRS member, you can just log into our website, and it is there on the front page,
Yeah.
just to say. And
Yeah.
anyone with access to the PRS who comes and looks at any registered work can see the names and the IPI numbers
Yeah.
of anyone.
Super
So
handy.
it's not that secret.
Yeah,
I think
okay.
but you're right. You're talking about the global issue
Yeah.
of how IPI numbers are accessed and disseminated, which is maybe a slightly higher level than the day-to-day issues for songwriters. But yeah, that's just
Yeah.
a point. Yeah.
Okay, and then you mentioned the ISWC. Do you want to take that further then? So the IPI, if you don't have an IPI, the ISWC is completely scuppered. Is that?
Yeah, so CSAC also control the ISWC, which is the International Standard Work Code, which is an ISO standard around works. That CSAC have actually made great improvements in accessibility to ISWC. So now there's a thing called an allocation service for new ones and a resolution for old songs. And you can actually, they're experimenting with the idea of getting like a temporary one very quickly. So they've made great progress in that. However, there is that hard dependency with the IPI. There is also a tech barrier, because to get access to the allocation or resolution services, it's quite a technical challenge. I mean, if you work for a large international publisher who's got good tech capability, then you can do it.
Yeah.
But most people don't have that instant access. So again, it's something where you would have thought these days you would have an app and you would be able to log the information and get yourself an ISWC.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to jump in, Tim, or Annabelle?
I mean, I was perhaps just going to a little bit of context of what work codes are and how they're obtained and what that means for the songwriter, and then maybe you'll want to build on that after. But so we've written the song. The song is at the appropriate point where it needs to be registered. That's where PRS as a PRO, that's where we come in. We need to know the details of that song. We need to know the IPI numbers of all the composers. We need to know the splits. What that gets you is a registered work that has a PRS tune code. Your song needs a unique identifier. You've not written the first song called I Love You. There are thousands, and we need to know when that song is used that it's your one with your name and your co-writers and your splits. And that gets you a UK tune code. But what you really want is an international standard work code, because that will be understood and accepted around the globe. Now, there's a little bit of mystery around how that has worked in the past, because once a work is registered with PRS, the way it's worked up to now is it has to meet certain standards to then be sent to the CSAC system to get your international standard work code. And that includes having all of the shares registered so they add up to 100%, but also some kind of copyright statuses and issues I'm not going to go into too much detail about now, to make sure there aren't any duplicates and it doesn't need any merges, which can take quite a long time. And that's why there can be circumstances where it takes a long time to get your code, or you feel like it never arrives.
Yeah.
So that's the context of where a work starts and where it ends. There is quite a lot happening, both in terms of the rules that we have. We'll soon be easing up the rules in terms of how far along a work needs to be to get a work code, so you can obtain them much more easily. And I think hopefully that will remove some of that doubt and some of that mystery, and people will have their work codes much sooner. But I guess the key thing is to understand that getting that information in to your PRO and getting it in a full and complete state, so we can get you an ISWC code, although that is the dull admin part of this that not everyone gets as excited about as me, that is the crucial first component for you as a creator on the journey to getting paid for the use of your work. And I really can't stress that enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to add, I mean, in the days of physical music, you had to have sorted all this out before you released. What streaming has done is disconnected, essentially, the release of the recording from the registration of the song. So you can put out a recording, as you know, and you find out, and the recording's a great success, and the song has not been registered, or it's been partly registered incorrectly, and therefore you're not going to be paid. And actually, part of our members' role is trying to make sure all those splits are agreed and the data is put in. But because it's not mandated before release, it often ends up being done after release, particularly if people are in a hurry because of it takes such a long time potentially to get the ISWC, so the track's out there. It's then hopefully a massive hit. Makes it 10 times more difficult to agree the splits once it's been a massive hit than agreeing it before it's released.
Yeah.
So we would like to see that agreed before it's released, and we'd like to see it mandated that you can't release a track. Not immediately, maybe in 3 years' time, maybe in 5 years' time, but you can't release a track either through a label or through a distributor until that information is correct and all logged in the system, and actually the label would have to provide the song code when it uploads the track. That's what we'd like.
I think that would be great.
Yeah.
But at the same time, realistically speaking, in the day and age that we live in, where I can order something from Amazon and it'll be here in 6 hours, or we're just an impatient people, aren't we? So music is created and then it needs to be out straight away. And I'm curious to ask, actually, if you don't mind me asking, how TikTok has impacted everyone's sort of business and so forth. Because my son is 9 and he's listening obsessively to this song. It's My Money Don't Jiggle Jiggle, something, I don't know, has lyrics like that. And apparently Louis Theroux, it was a sample of him doing a thing. And then, just as an example, and of course somebody somewhere was a bright spark, probably has, is much smarter than me, has decided to make that a composition, and then it's out, it's happening, it's streaming, and it's doing things. When I'm thinking about label copy, which is I think what you were speaking about then, and we spoke about that upstairs, I don't see how you can get that to work, because people put music out straight away, don't they? Please go ahead.
So whilst I don't disagree that there is a gold standard of data, so there's an ISWC, there's full splits, and there's publisher information, which you probably need all of that information to make some form of claiming model to actually get paid. What we need earlier than that is we need a much simpler data set, which I'd call the minimum viable data set. And that minimum viable data set is what connects the song to the recording. Getting that very, very early at the time of release is what's important. And the minimum viable data set only really needs to be the songwriter, the songwriters, and the work. Once you've got those together, we shouldn't think of recording information and recording metadata as separate to song information. A recording has always got a song in it.
Yeah.
We should think of recordings as part of one set of metadata.
Yeah.
So when a recording is put out, and I agree this should be mandatory, we should have it mandatory that you have to provide the song and the songwriter as the information. So when the label's releasing it, or a DSP wants to put it out, or whomever is the releasing party, aggregator, distributor, whomever, it has to be attached. We can then, folks like the PROs, CMOs, or whomever, can then put the two together, or they'll have the two together, and they can attach the gold standard information onto it and flesh it out, all the information that's necessary for the claiming and the payment side.
Surely that would save a whole lot of time.
And a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
And speed things up. And allow credits on DSP services, and allow all sorts of things.
So just, if you wouldn't reminding me, what's stopping that happening again?
Good question.
Just wondered.
Again, going back, it's the label copy days went up. Once upon a time, you had to provide a releasing party, a label, had to provide label copy to a mechanical collection society like MCPS in order to allow the pressing plant to actually make the pressing. Unless they had a license, they weren't allowed to press. And they had to provide the label copy to get the pressing, so they could not release it. Once labels were no longer the point of sale to the market, the DSPs were the point of sale, there was no pressing, which was the restricted act under mechanical rights, and everyone took a step back from it and just went, oh, well, DSPs are putting it out.
It's
And
not
we
just
and we
that,
lost
though,
it.
isn't it? That there was a deliberate decision by the publishing sector that they didn't trust the labels to pay properly, and therefore they wanted to license, with saying there's a performing right in streaming as well, they wanted to license the streaming services directly, which in theory is a great idea, because it means instead of collecting the money from the label, which is what they would do before, the publisher would go to the label, say, you owe me this much, and then we're going to pay our songwriter a percentage of that, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Instead, that was disconnected. And so you've got instances where the streaming services don't know who to pay for the songs. They know who to pay for the recording, because it's who uploaded the performing, and they get all the recording, they got all the data that way. They don't know who to pay for the song, because it's sort of been licensed backwards in a way.
Yeah.
So it's been licensed, but without the information on what catalogue is owned, and that's claimed after the songs have been streamed by this matching process. And as a result, the songwriters are paying for the matching process. I mean, the work we've just done shows it's anywhere between, at best, PRS, you stream in the UK, it's 10% of your money is being used running the process to make sure you're being paid. I must admit, if my bank took 10% of my salary before passing it on, I'd be a bit annoyed. But I understand you have to bear the burden of matching. If you're streamed in Mexico, apparently it's 45%. You're streamed in Brazil, it's 30%. Wow. So enormous amounts of your money is going through this matching process. And the burden essentially is on the industry and the writers to pay for that, which is why we want to see it flipped on its head. I know we're told that's boiling the ocean and being overly ambitious, but it's kind of ridiculous the way it works at the moment, that after the streams, you've got to go back in and claim and try and match it, rather than right up front having that data provided and the publishers and the society saying, we own this, you DSPs figure out how to pay us. And that's what's sort of happening in America on the MLC side, and that is being paid for by the streaming services, not the publishers or writers.
Yeah.
There was a lot of points there. I mean, there was a lot of points. Sorry.
I'd say, you're absolutely right that the PRO's working to process not just digital usage, but in fact all royalties that we're collecting from all streams, deduct a proportion from those royalties. And what we're doing with that is to pay for the cost to license, collect, process and distribute, which even in a perfect world with matching data requires a significant engine to make it happen. But the point that you make, that there's significant matching effort to happen after the usage, that is correct, and that's why there's significant issues in the industry running to try and align the ISWCs, the work codes that we have, with the recording codes, the ISRCs, which although the two are intrinsically joined, the data itself is not, and there's some really important industry level work with that. But I'm just conscious that there may be some people watching this stream who are self-releasing, who are in fact involved in the recording at a more DIY level. And I just wanted to point out that you do have the codes, you are registering the works and you are creating the recordings. And in those instances, when you register your works with PRS, you can give us those ISRCs. We love it when we get them. You can put them in on the registration. And that means that link exists. And so the cost and effort and the likelihood of us making the match for you, the cost is very low and the likelihood is very, very high. So just anyone who's watching who is in control of both pieces, who can deal with that, it's a really good idea to give us all of that data and make that match at the point of creation where you can.
Brilliant. Do you want to say something?
I wonder how technical the conversation really wants to get, to be honest with you. On the point of the so-called pass-through from labels, in the US, it was deemed that it was all mechanical rights, and in the US it is a compulsory license, it's a pass-through. Outside of the US, there's actually performing rights involved in every single digital use, and the hope was to try and marry the two together so that the licensing approach changed.
I know, but it's a mess. It's a mess.
I am not arguing it's a mess. 100%.
So, in order to kind of fix some of these problems and help songwriters get paid and get credited and actually survive, because that's the state this is in now, I think. There's a lot of... So we were talking about this upstairs as well, about ISWCs. And, I've been releasing music since I was 18 years old, and I don't know how to get an ISWC. And I had to look up what an IPI was. And I was like, oh, yeah, it's my PRS number. Okay, fine. But, it's like... I'm a director of the Ivors and I'm a director of PRS. So it's like the level of ignorance out there is you cannot plumb the depths of it. So there's a lot of education that needs to happen, which is hopefully why we're doing this. But, should the onus of that be all on the songwriters to know all their numbers, fill in all the details right, chase it up, make sure it's, what's an answer for this? Especially, imagine if you're 16 years old creating like amazing beats in your bedroom and putting them straight up and having huge smashes on TikTok, How do we do this?
I'm not sure there's a one size fits all, to be honest with you, because there is a very big difference between a self-releasing person and someone who has, say, a publisher or a label. So if you have a label, I would say it's the label's responsibility. I think that's how the model worked in the past, and that has worked. So I think we maybe don't all agree on the amount of information a label should provide in advance of release or at the same time as release. But I think as a minimum, they should be providing the song and the songwriter information. And that would make the cost of the matching, that would make everything so much easier and smoother later on. And it would give that ability for DSPs to offer the credits on the service. It would allow that discovery through the DSP services. If you're self-releasing, then you've taken that responsibility on yourself. If you're releasing, then you become responsible for making sure that your own metadata is correct. But what we do need to do is facilitate that with easy, accessible tech. Yeah. And that's, I think, the part that's a bit where we lack.
That's what I was going to say. And also the label at the moment has no benefit or liability. So that even if they had to put that data in, they get it wrong, there's no issue, which is why we're talking about, can we eventually move to a system where actually it's required by the DSPs, so the labels have to provide it, and then they help educate the writers. I think if you couldn't release without having your registration, even the kid in the bedroom, you would register, but you have to make it super quick and easy. So you have to make it to the extent where I'm about to upload my beats.
Yeah, totally.
It's the first time I've ever uploaded my beats.
Yeah.
It says, click here, pay £5 or preferably nothing, get your numbers, get your IPI number, here's your ISWC number. Are you making your beats by yourself? Are you making your beats with a friend? All right. Enter all of this, and then you put that in when you upload through your distributor. And the thing is, it's probably a pain the very first time you do it because you're the kid in the bedroom, but it's like, I can't get my track up without it, so you do it. The second time you do it, you're like, I've already got my IPI number, I'm making some more, I know how to do it. But we've got to make it easy so the kids in the bedroom can do it. But what's interesting at the moment is there are people out there who have enormous hits who aren't members of CMOs because they don't have to be, but they're losing money because they're not being paid for their writing. But then you say to them, you've got to pay £100 up front, and they're like, no way.
You just lose
No way. I don't believe it.
I don't know why, and I totally can see how that would happen, especially with different types of genres of music that I work in. I can guarantee you that some of the most popular music at the moment that's in the charts doing bits, as my sons keep saying these days, is just, I think it's the allure of having a track doing really, really well and not wanting to do any of the stuff behind it that actually leads to money.
I also wonder if, like, in the meantime, until we get there, like I went to music university and like going to school. I wonder if there's like ways that we could be teaching this like at a way younger age. Like, I'm 30 and I feel like I didn't really know what a CAA number was till I was like 27. Like, I wonder if there's like a way of like, all right, if you're studying a music course, this is like taught as like an actual module.
Yeah,
like,
I agree with that.
There needs to be more lessons of people. Like, I agree that it should be easier, but maybe in the meantime, it's just from a younger age, people understanding this.
I mean, I think it has to be a broad approach. I mean, PRS does quite a lot of activity in UK educational institutions, especially at that that kind of graduate age. But we've got to cover such a broad group. We have 8,000, 9,000 new composers joining the society every year. You're not going to get round to a seminar. We hope they might watch a live stream, but you've really got to cover a broad audience. And there's a real breadth of awareness. There's a breadth of activity, of age, of foreknowledge. And so Scott's right, it's not one size fits all. But I mean, I would accept that the challenge for us as the industry is to try and make both the information and the tools as easy and as accessible as they can be. At PRS, we're committed to looking at the work registration process to make sure we make that as accessible as it can be for that whole range of members. And then I think there's work for those of us in the wider industry to honour the commitment of people giving us that accurate, complete data at the point of creation and make sure that that's being used, it's being linked, and it's being shared and disseminated as widely as it can be around the globe, so that you see the reward from that. And that creates a circle of people saying, I gave them the data and I got paid. And that does happen a lot in a lot of cases. Let's be clear, we're not talking about a broken system here. We're talking about how do we move to 100%, so you as the individual creator know that you can get paid if you do the right things. So I don't think it's a simple fix, and it has to happen at all levels of activity.
One of the things, talking about apps and technology, one of the things that I've started doing in my co-writing sessions is using an app called Session, and as Graham described it earlier to me, he said it's like a digital handshake, which is a really good way of putting it, because when you walk into the studio, the app on your phone registers with the producer who's in the room writing, and then all your numbers just go like onto the system, and it's just sort of automatically. And it would be interesting to know what would happen if a huge artist walked into the room and their details went on, but that's a question for the Session app people. But it is really interesting because it's made me have lots more conversations with people about all their numbers and identifying codes and everything, and how we can start fixing these problems. And so it puts the onus onto the songwriters and producers to get the app and get the thing on their computer, but it's really seamless. Once you've got it going, once you've got it working, you literally walk in the room and it's done. So if everybody could do that, that would be amazing. But
it would. Yeah. The only thing is it has to then require that goes out with the release, because you guys can do that and have all but then if it's not, then that information isn't provided or is not mandated to be provided at the same time the recording is released, then we're hoping then that PRS can back match it afterwards because the information's gone into their system. And so you're still paying for the matching process and you're still waiting for the delays, and particularly when it's outside of the UK. As we say, if your hits are only in the UK, then PRS can process it as quickly as they can do through ICE. If your hits are around the world, you're still going to be looking at, you can get all the data right, you're still potentially looking at 2 years in some cases to get your money, with a whole load of it being lost to the system.
Yeah, and nothing is just in the UK. No hit or even release is only in one territory now. It's just everywhere, and it's astonishing. It's beautiful how it can go around the whole world, but that's incredibly complicated behind the scenes, isn't it?
It's quite the headache, it sounds like.
I mean, we are processing globally, ex-US and Canada, but you're right that it can vary territory to territory where it's outside of the processing that we're able to do directly, where we're talking about big digital services. Interesting that you raised Session, really interesting service, really interesting proposition, and the opportunity that it raises for organisations like PRS when we're looking at our work registration is, what's the opportunity to integrate? How can we bring in wider sources of data to make sure that those links are made and that nothing's lost? So I think it's a really interesting one to raise.
Can I add something as well? I feel like the overall arch, what we're trying to sort of talk about, is almost like we're trying to change culture, trying to change the culture of being a musician. I don't know about you guys when you first started out music, but when I said I wanted to do music as a job, I didn't have really anyone to look up to that did music as a job. No one in my school necessarily. They went, oh, cool, you'll be an artist, you'll tour. I don't know what that, I don't know how you can make a living in the music industry, all that stuff. And I wonder if it's like, and I think Session is part of this, of like, if we can get those 16-year-old kids like, oh, cool, you want to do music, this is how you do it, and like change it from such an early age where those 16-year-old kids that are making beats are like, cool, I'm going to put this on Session right away because if I want a career in music, this is how I do it. Yeah. I wonder if it's like changing the whole way we like talk about being a musician. And I don't know if maybe that's too like airy, but I don't think it is being too airy.
I think you're totally right, but it seems to me that the more I listen in, the problem is so broad, trying to cover all the bases. For DIYers, as soon as we keep speaking from the grassroots, as it were, because initially you're going to want to release music by yourself because that's usually how most people get to that point, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like those DSPs, definitely it's along with education, other places to really attack.
It's almost more important in some respects to get the grassroots people doing it, because if you're looking after your own things, no one else is looking out for you.
True.
If you're a large international artist and you're working with a large international artist, you will get matched post usage. That will happen. It may cost, it may be a delay, but it will happen and you will get paid. The people who will miss out the most will be the long tail, self-releasing, who don't have anyone looking out for their interests.
And there are thresholds, right? This is something I'm really interested in. I understand that when that processing happens around the world, there are thresholds, and if you're not above a certain number of streams or money... Sorry?
Not at Kobalt.
but there are, then that money doesn't get passed on. And that's slightly different from on the recording side, because if you On the recording side, I know my husband self-released something, barely earns a penny, but when he does earn a penny, it just ticks up. And then eventually, if he gets to 50 quid, he can take it out. But I understand on the publishing side, if you don't meet the threshold each time, the money doesn't pass on or doesn't get back to PRS, for example, for you guys to pay it on.
Yeah, I mean, this was... Oh, sorry.
No, you go.
I would say this was one of the drivers that led to pan-European licensing and led to multi-territorial licensing that changed things and how it was going. Because what was happening was each of the individual management collection societies in each country were responsible for processing all of the usage in their country. And there were some of these countries that are very small and don't have overly complicated systems. And they were trying to catch up with this sudden enormous wave of volume and couldn't do so. So, of course, they went, well, how do we deal with this? We'll only look at the top. So depending on where the usage was and which DSP, there will be a different variety of where there is a cut-off.
And this is for writers who've done the right thing. This is, I take your point about writers need to be educated, but I think our issue is, even if the writers have been educated, done the right thing, whether they've got managers or not helping them or publishers, they still might not hit their thresholds and get paid.
The threshold is usually on the value of a match. So if you've already got the data there and the match is already made, then you automatically slide in on an auto match rather than someone having to actually sit there and look it up. It's that cost factor of someone sitting there going, is it a match? Whereas if it's already matched, it goes through an automated process, and even if you've got one stream, you're captured. Yeah. So that's why I'm saying it's probably even more important for those self-releasing people to actually get that match information, and it's mandatory that it's included in the release.
Yeah, that's how we apply it. Back to the context: 27 trillion performances, millions and millions of works. You've got to get the machine to match it. We're not going to be doing that hand by hand. And if it auto matches, and the best way to do that is if we've got the two codes and we know they link, or you may manage it from the title and the composer names. If not, that will sail through. And the only threshold that you would apply is it may be literally, if it was a thousandth of a penny, that's not going to go anywhere. But if we have to manually match it, a human has to sit and look it up on the system, and there is clearly a cost and there's a time limit to that we can't overcome. And so we'll go as low as we can, but if the machine doesn't match it, the humans can only match it down to a certain level. And that's really why we come back to these discussions of talking to our songwriter members and explaining that data and forging those links, especially if you're the only one looking out for yourself, is so important to ensure that you're getting paid.
Yeah, absolutely. I just looking at the time, I just wanted to ask if Michelle or Garrett or Graham wanted to add anything that we might not have fully covered, or in fact if we've got any questions from our lovely studio audience. Does anyone want to? Everyone's got very shy. Yeah.
My question is mainly basically, I'm on TikTok as well as every songwriter nowadays. If I upload a 1 minute video of a song that's maybe not even a complete song, I'll sit there and I'm just jamming something out that's a minute long. Obviously, that's got its own copyright. But if I don't register that with you, and for example, that would blow up on TikTok, how do I go about it registering after it's blown up, and can I get paid for that? That's mainly my question.
Okay, so TikTok, although TikTok as a service has been around for a long time, actually, it's only fairly recently that we've been able to bring that service into license for PRS. And so we're just at the point where we're starting to receive proper line-by-line usage reporting data. And the real rule for anything that you're using online is you want to get that registration in as early as you can in the process. You can always, if it misses out in the original processing of that, and this is true for any digital service, you can contact your PRO. You can try and get a match made retrospectively. You can try and get an adjustment made, but that is so much more difficult than having the complete metadata and the complete registration in place at the point at which you uploaded it, which in the scenario you described, you'd be empowered to do. So it's just I would advocate that as by far the best way to do it.
Okay.
I was just going
to ask, how far back can you claim? If you registered it 3 months later, are you likely to get paid? Or if you registered it a year later, what's What's the
So,
cut-off?
it would depend where we are in the cycle, and I don't know exactly what that cycle will be for TikTok. So it may actually be, in fact, that the registration could come slightly later. But generally, as an organisation, we accept claims on kind of missed or unmatched usage for a period of 3 years after the original distribution.
Yeah, TikTok is one of those slightly strange ones because a lot of the mechanical rights and the performing rights are not licensed together. It's a very odd one. So TikTok actually have a global administration deal with a company called MRI, Music Reports Inc. in the US. So in the US, the system is quite different because the DSPs select who they use for their administration unless they come under one of the statutory licenses, and then the statutory licensing body does it. So TikTok have elected to choose to use MRI to do their processing for the majority of their mechanical rights. If you're a small rights owner with mechanical rights, you might actually be falling into a bit of a gap. Because there's actually quite a lot of gaps with TikTok, because they've done a lot of global deals with large-scale publishers for mechanical rights, but they're not picking up the mechanical rights necessarily from the local societies. Again, I'm not talking about necessarily about the UK. As I say, the PRS in the UK is a very good situation, but in lots of countries it's not happening. So TikTok, there are lots of gaps.
Very, very interesting. Thanks a lot. I should probably go and
Great question.
register every one of my
Yeah.
30-second clips then.
Yeah.
So much work.
Do you want to say something else?
Yeah, I was just going to say, just very, very quickly, I've been asking for lots of things from lots of people. I want labels to do things. I'd like CSET to do things. DSPs need to do things as well. So what we need DSPs to do is we need DSPs to stop manipulating data. So in the same way as aggregators and other parties, if you get the data, don't strip it out, don't ignore it, don't change it. What we need is a series of business rule code to say, this is how you treat data. And we need the DSPs to follow that code as well.
Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
Thank you.
That was a great question. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your information. It's very, very interesting. I am actually self-releasing because to me it is way easier than just getting in the room with other people, because as you were describing, as a self-releasing artist, I can just submit the ISRC at the same time that I am putting all the information at PRS, for instance, and I can get the tune code matched with the PPL submission form and all of that. So it's way easier. So I think there's a lot to be done so that it makes it more appealing to me to just get in the room with other people. So I have got a few questions actually, but I guess I'd say it looks like there's a lot to be done by lawmakers and at an international level. Just like we agreed something about copyrights and all of that. So who should be doing this? Because obviously the Ivors can help, but I don't think the Ivors alone will achieve this. So I'm thinking, obviously, Kobalt has a big power, like it's the biggest publisher, something like that.
So should we talk about what the government are investigating at the moment or working on? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So you guys may have followed the fixed streaming campaign that the Ivors was really involved in, which led to a parliamentary inquiry, which led to a whole series of recommendations. And as always with government, they never immediately go, oh, here's the series of recommendations, let's turn them into law. They say, okay, we need to explore these in more detail and figure out what can actually happen. But the good news was the government said, okay, we recognise there's a problem here. We recognise the money's not getting back as it should be doing. Or streaming isn't paying as it should be doing to artists and songwriters. So can we explore the issues in more detail? And some of those have been around artists and transparency over label contracts and things like, outdated digital royalties. And the other part has also been looking at data and song data as part of that and what can be done to essentially create a well-functioning system. I know we have kind of people represented on some of those groups. You're on one of the groups, PRS are on one of the groups. But really our government's saying, okay, it is just the UK, but we're a really important market. Let's bang people's heads together and say, can we actually achieve something here? And if we can't, they've said very clearly to us and to the Ivors that they will go to legislation. So they've kind of said, here's an opportunity for the industry to sort it out. So we've published, is a good opportunity, with the Ivors support, a song royalties manifesto. And this is based on some work we did 3 years ago, trying to map out these song royalty chains. So, Yes, issues with data, really big thing. But even when you get all the data right, issues with deductions along the chains and issues with delays. So meeting songwriters who say, I had a massive hit 6 months ago, I've not received anything. And you have to go, probably get it in a year or two if you're, hopefully making sure you've got the data direct. So we've been trying to talk, with all of these guys about, well, can we move to a situation where Credits Due campaign, works really well to educate writers, their managers, and all the rest of us about how you get the data registered correctly in the first place. Then can we get to a stage where over time it is mandated you can't release a recording without the song data? And then what we'd like to see, slightly controversially, but in the longer term, is that the information on ownership is made public. So you know who owns the songs and the splits. And so instead of these guys having to spend a lot of money and time matching, actually the services can say, we know who owns the recordings, we now know who owns all the songs, and at the end of each month, we're going to process that, and then we're going to pay. So a recording artist, at best case, particularly a self-releasing one, you can be paid 2 months after you've streamed. So if you have 1 million streams, in theory, hopefully, you get your money a month or 2 months later. Whereas with your song royalties at the moment, you can't. So if we were able to turn the system on the head and have that information provided, the costs of actually paying people correctly would fall to the DSPs rather than falling to the publishing sector. It's a big ask, but we were asked to be ambitious, so.
Yeah.
I agree with the vast majority of what it said, but I don't think we need to go quite so far to achieve the benefit. What we need to achieve the benefit is that minimum viable data that the labels provide. And if the labels provide us the song and the songwriter, then the whole matching process, everything becomes so much smoother, so much quicker, so much cheaper, that we achieve the vast majority of those things, which I agree are the right things. we're not talking against each other, but I think we can get there a lot quicker if we aim at that minimum viable data set.
We think we should be doing that in the meantime, but with a long-term goal, because at the moment the streaming services don't know what they're licensing half the time because they don't know what catalogue is owned exactly by whom. If we had all this clear data and the feeds, they'd know exactly who to pay. And the burden would sit on the streaming services to pay correctly, not sitting on the collecting societies and the matching hubs to do it. And I know it's a long-term thing, but we should be looking long-term and we should be ambitious. And yes, we can achieve the other steps along the way, but if we never end up with that goal of paying songwriters within 2 months, we'll still have territorial licensing and we'll still have deductions along the system.
Yeah.
My next slide might sound like a bit of a plug, but I mean, as Kobalt, we go through AMRA, which is a global collection society, so we don't have that territoriality issue. But I think we agree on lots of things. There's lots of people that need to move, lots of groups and stakeholders that need to move, and the education element is vital. So I think this is, thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you all so much for being part of this. We could probably talk about this for hours, actually, and it's fascinating and important. And thanks for your questions as well. Would anyone like to add anything? Or Graham, shall I? Oh, yeah, Garrett, yeah.
Garrett Levin from DEMA. I'm delighted to be here, delighted to be supporting Credits Due. This has been a fascinating conversation. And I think these conversations are where we all need to be starting from as an industry, to be talking about these as challenges that impact all of us. And I think one thing that really struck me, and I can't really take credit for this, frankly, I'll give credit where it's due, which is to someone who I heard who worked at Sound Exchange, the US collective on non-interactive streaming, who once said the single best way to deal with matching is to identify things in the first place, and then you don't actually have to match them. They're identified from the beginning. And I think part of the cultural change for all of us, I think you like very astutely point out, we're talking about cultural changes. Part of that is about moving away from this notion of that really challenging task of matching the recording, which is what the services know and what they receive from the record labels or the distributors, matching that to a work that they don't have, that is already so far down the chain, they don't know where to even start. And it's issue for the CMOs, it's an issue for the services. And so I think having these conversations where we can start to surface these issues, surface these shared challenges, and think about how we move forward together. We're so excited to be a part of this. So thanks for having us. And
thank you so much for supporting us with DEMA. And yeah, Michelle.
Thank you, Garrett. Thank you, everybody. This has been great. It's so funny whenever I'm watching these things around an issue outside of the U.S. I look so longingly at you guys, like, oh, you can have these conversations. We have such songwriters in the United States are regulated. 75% of our incomes are regulated by rate court and consent decrees and copyright law and all these things. So I'm like, oh, that must be so nice. So we are, I think the next step of Credits Due, I think, is to bring this over into the US and have these conversations as well. Different messes over there, but many shared challenges. So, you know, we have this thing called the MLC, the Mechanical Licensing Collective, which I heard you reference. And what that showed, aside from, you know, hopefully getting songwriters paid and publishers paid on streams, it also is a database. And I don't think we realized the radical transparency of this database. What we really saw was the good, bad, and the ugly of what was messed up like, if you ever are wondering, go look at the MLC's database and see where your catalogs have gone wrong. You really see it in real time. I mean, things I've written probably over 1,000 songs, and a lot of them have messed up data, and I'm on this stuff, and I've been published my whole life. So my publisher should, be on this as well. Everything goes wrong at some point. At some point, we all have something get messed up. So I highly recommend checking out I think if you are outside of the U.S., you could still check the database. It is available to all. I recommend that. And then I think let's take this back over to the States, and we'll do one there.
That would be amazing. Thank you so much, Michelle and Garrett. Brilliant comments and suggestions. Okay. Well, thank you all very much for joining. And to our audience, thank you. For everyone who's watching, thank you so much. Send us questions and ideas, because we're all in this together. And thank you so much to the Ivors. Have a brilliant rest of Ivors week, everybody. And that's all from us. Thank you so much.